Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. On this week's episode, we are going to be covering our top event right here, Salt City Rock Salt. So Salt City Rock Salt was actually talked about on this channel a little bit earlier this year when I covered the NACL cEDH 1K. So this Rock Salt event here is put on by the same group that put that event on, and it's a group out in Utah, and they ended up getting 95 players, which is pretty solid for like a local tournament scene. That's pretty sick. So 95 players for the cEDH tournament. We're gonna take it, break it down, and talk about the decks that performed well. We've got one very particular interesting deck that actually took up 3 of the top 16 slots, and it's a deck I literally hadn't heard anything about in cEDH until now. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit about this deck and also break down this top 16. If you are interested in more events by this group, I know they have been putting on events in Utah, and I definitely can leave some information in the description down below to see what they are planning on doing next. Before we go any further, I just want to remind you, while you're here on YouTube, hit that like button and that subscribe button. They help out the channel a ton, and they are free to do. You can also hit that bell icon if you want to know whenever we post new videos. Also, there is cEDH coaching offered here on this channel. If you are interested in cEDH coaching, come find me out at comedianmtg@gmail.com. You can hit me up on Discord or Twitter. All of those places are super relevant for that. Otherwise, let's jump on into this top 16. We got Blue Farm updated by Froyage1. This is a pretty classic Blue Farm list here. Some notable inclusions here include Fairy Mastermind, a piece that's often not really viewed as a Blue Farm mid-range piece, especially because of the printing of Orcish Bowmasters. Now, Blue Farm has been one of the decks most likely to include Mastermind as time has gone on, just because a 2/1 Flash Flyer is actually super efficient at getting you those draws with Tymna. Now, it's kind of interesting because we can't really preach that it's a Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora format without acknowledging the fact that Fairy Mastermind should then, in fact, draw you multiple cards on your opponent's turn. So it's definitely pretty interesting to look at this card this way and wonder, how often is it actually getting you the value you need? Obviously, it looks very bad in the face of a Bowmasters, but is it so much better without Bowmasters being present that it's worth including? Also, is it worth including over a piece like Archivist of Ogma, which I know some people lean towards Archivist, some people lean towards Mastermind. Obviously, Mastermind having that little bit of evasion definitely helps it for the Tymna attacker theory. So it's a pretty interesting group of cards and definitely interesting analysis here. Another interesting one here is Sheoldred. So there's no Talion in this list, but we have Sheoldred. And if you can get out of the Phyrexian text, we can figure out, oh no, it just shows the Phyrexian text. Okay. How about that one? All right, cool. Yeah, so Sheoldred, obviously, very strong card here. Able to really punish your opponents. Once again, if we're in that Rhystic Study, drawing a bunch of cards meta, punishing your opponents for drawing a bunch of cards, it seems like a really good way to do it with Sheoldred. And then, obviously, being able to gain life back with your own card draw is pretty sick. You know, Sheoldred's life gain kind of allowing you to make up for the fact that it hits you for 4 off the nose. But in general, I've noticed more and more decks moving towards Sheoldred in the 99, just as a piece that basically says, if the game goes long, I start to get a lot of control over the board. You know, when you're playing a Wheel of Fortune style effect too, you know, anytime your opponents hit that 14 life area and below, you know, Sheoldred plus Wheel becomes just murder some people. So that's pretty good. This deck being a little lighter on lands for some Blue Farm lists, down to 27 lands here. Also worth noting, no 3-mana Teferi. As I said, when I was experiencing Blue Farm at the Crimson Lion tournament, I think 3-mana Teferi is probably one of the best cards in the deck. So I'm a little bit surprised to see a bunch of Blue Farm pilots not on the card. Here we also have the choice to use Phantasmal Image as the clone effect for this list. Great for copying Docksides and things of that nature. Apart from that, not too many insane inclusions here. This deck also not choosing to do the Born Upon the Wind stuff, no Smothering Tithe or any of like the more unique choices that we've seen as of late. Maybe Snapback being a bit of a callback to, you know, some early 2020 Blue Farm stuff that was very much popularized by some of the European players. So pretty standard Blue Farm list. Moving on. Friends Forever, duplicated by Silent E by Kang957. We got this baby Blue Farm-esque list. We have a Lucas and Will list here. Another one of these decks that I actually covered on last week's episode. Basically, it is a Blue Farm variant, except for you trade Tymna and Crom being the consistent card advantage engines in the command zone, with the fact that Will is an infinite mana outlet with certain Dockside combos. I've also been interrupted by a small kitten during this part of the deck tech. Moving on, Dockside Extortionist, obviously being able to combo with cards like Baron Master Wizard. There's some stuff you can do with Mayhem Devil, but also I believe there's usually a Cloudstone Curio, as I see here, in these decks. This list obviously going for the One Ring stuff, no Talion, but this one also opting to go for Hullbreaker Horror as another way to generate infinite mana. And this obviously being a little bit big for a blue farm curve, but you know, back in the day, people were playing Peer into the Abyss, and this list choosing, I'm going to take the 7-mana Crab instead. Luckily, Will allows cards like Mox Amber to be turned on very easily, and also like gives you clues for your Mox Opals. So despite this list actually not really playing any 2-mana mana rocks like Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, or any of the talismans, which are pretty much staples in this 4-color combination, this list kind of gets to get away with them because you have Will taking up that 2-mana slot, which then turns on once again these effects like Mox Amber. Will also gets to be able to come down and turn on things like Deflecting Swat and Fierce Guardianship, which is pretty nice to be able to have that down super early in the game, as well as a card like Deadly Rollick. Limduel's Vault, definitely not a typical inclusion in these type of archetypes, but as we said, without that card advantage from Timnut and Crom in the command zone, it takes a little bit of extra oomph to get this Mary, no. Without Timnut and Crom in the command zone, you do need a little extra work to be able to get you some card advantage, which is once again I'm surprised to not see a card like Talion in the 99 of this deck. Will also allows you to have a much better Beseech the Mirror deck than you would normally expect to in this type of deck. Oh my goodness, Kitty, you're crazy. Blinded Means is a really interesting inclusion here because it also, it's just been one of those cards that's like my 101st card in Blue Farm for quite some time because it's so good at being able to break parity on what your opponents are doing and really create a one-sided board situation. So Blind Obedience, very, very strong, extremely, extremely powerful. Apart from that, this deck doing some pretty interesting and spicy stuff, and definitely excited to see if this archetype will continue to be very popular. With Timnut and Crom in the format, how often will these Friends Forever really be able to compete? We have Offensive Wombat here with Timnut in the streets, Cromming in the sheets. Oof, y'all are really making me say some deck names on here for sure. This is another Blue Farm list. Notable inclusions include Grim Hireling, which was very popular back in, like, once again, 2020-esque Blue Farm lists, but honestly, haven't seen it at all lately. But really good against like other creature matchups and things like that. And this list also doing some older tech, being on cards like Peer into the Abyss and Time Twister in Blue Farm, which is once again stuff that really hasn't been used in a little while in most of the common winning decks. But apart from that, it really does look like if you took a 2021 Blue Farm list and put it on paper, it would look a lot like this one here. Basically, since Modern Horizons 2, this would be like if you snapshotted that. That's kind of what we were looking at right here. But yeah, still Blue Farm, still able to be powerful, doing its thing. And for me saying it's a couple years old, it's still been a really good deck this entire time. So not really changing too much is kind of okay. So we have Bay Slayer King here with Isika, God of the Cat. Now this is a list that we did cover on the last one of these tournaments. I believe another top 16 performance from this pilot. There is a lot of really interesting stuff to be done with this list, and I know they actually left a comment on my last video because I sort of asked for a little bit of clarity on some of the lines in this deck. And there's definitely some interesting stuff in here, and I know that Displace Your Kitten, and there's some birthing pod, or there was some birthing pod stuff I could have sworn. Oh, well now I'm doubting everything. Well, at least there's Kitten and Teferi lines. There are lines where you can flicker Kitten and Eternal Witness and stuff like that to be able to generate infinite mana through cards like Lotus Petal and Jeweled Lotus repeatedly being cast from them. But apart from that, this is like a really interesting 5-color mid-range deck. It's got a lot of different layered win cons using cards like Reality Chip, which is definitely not the most common for a 5-color deck option. But this deck's doing a lot of really sweet stuff. It's got a lot of like the generically powerful cards, right? Dockside, Thoracle, Oppo, Orcish Bowmasters, Ranger Captain, Talion. But also having like a bunch of unique synergies like Reality Chip and stuff like that. All cards that work with the Isika's ability to make mana as well. Also having consistent, reliable win cons like Underworld Breach could only be so so bad when you have a 5-color commander. Also love seeing the tech of having Minsc Imbu Timeless Hero in here. Minsc Imbu is just kind of being talked about more and more as of late as just this ability to, for one turn, create a hasty attacker. To be able to do that is like a lot of value, and, draw 4 every other turn is still really, really good. So this card is definitely putting in a lot of work, and I would not be surprised if we do start to see it more and more as time goes on. TVC X Pride here with Ian, Notice Me Senpai. Well, TVC, TCV. Oh man, I messed up your name. I'm noticing you, but probably not well enough. Okay. Anyways, this is a pretty sick Tivit list, and by pretty sick, I mean it's a pretty cool Tivit list that is doing a lot of the Tivit stuff. We have not many insane innovations here in the archetype, just sort of a smorgasbord of the best Tivit things that are available right now. We got the classic 29 land, using so many advantage engines, as Tivit is known to do. Smothering Tithe, Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, One Ring, Talion, Shieldred, all of the above, all of these crazy advantage engines being able to leverage you a ton of value with Tivit helming the deck. You have your Teferi and Displacer Kitten combos, you have your Thoracle combos as per usual, and a bunch of stuff like that. This list is following my pattern with Tivit, which is the Cutting of Demonic Consultation. I have been trying that in some of my more mid-range-esque decks, knowing that basically the card quality on Tainted Pact is so high. It's a very, very powerful card, and this is sort of an innovation that I was starting to hear from people who were playing Atraxa pretty frequently. And basically, I kept finding myself in Tivit in situations where I was like, man, I really, really hate this Consultation card because it lost me the game by making me need to dig super deep with it, and just creating bad scenarios for a deck that doesn't really want to be able to use Consult aggressively. So I tried trimming it, and it's still in testing, but as of right now I've been pretty happy with the card quality of Tainted Pact and the card quality of Thoracle for ending your wins, and this pilot following that methodology as well. This list is pretty classic Tivit stuff, and doing a lot of powerful stuff in Esper. Tivit's one of the top 3 performing decks in the format right now, and it will probably continue to do so. We have Falk Star here with 1984 treasures. This is a Dihada Turbo Ad Nauseam deck, and if we check down here in the land base, we have 24 lands, a pretty classic staple of Dihada. This is a Turbo Naz deck. This is a Bolas' Citadel deck, which I know there's been some debate on Bolas' Citadel and Dihada, but I find that pretty uncuttable, especially as most lists are playing Magda. So you need to find a scenario where you basically make a single treasure, and then Magda plus your commander just gets you a Bolas' Citadel onto the battlefield, which is an insanely powerful strategy, because it basically turns into, counter this 2-mana creature, counter my commander, or I get a Citadel on the battlefield. And in a 24 land deck, it's very easy to rip through your entire deck. Something notable about this version's also playing Hoarding Broodlord, which is, a pretty chunky card. We got a mana curve here, and I'm really interested in checking the exact number here, of 1.44 for this Turbo Naz deck. But Dihada, well known for not exactly being a Turbo Ad Nauseam deck, more so a Turbo Breach deck. The distinction being that Dihada mills into your graveyard, gets you your treasures back, and allows you to cast a very easy Underworld Breach, because your command zone plus Flicker means that you are able to go infinite with Breach. And it's very easy with Dihada to be able to assemble those Breach lines without really a ton of extra work. All that being said, the fact that we are now layering some Reanimator strategies on top of that, which also work really well with Underworld Breach, seems pretty sick. Hoarding Broodlord noticeably not able to get a Peer into the Abyss as is traditionally found with this. However, you can get Bolas' Citadel and another card, which I'm not really sure what specifically you get, because there is Saw and Half combos in here, right? So it's pretty interesting. Also worth noting, we have Final Fortune and Chance for Glory here as instant speed, extra turn effects. Chance for Glory not traditionally played in Dihada, Final Fortune quite often played in Dihada. But Chance for Glory clearly here being, saying, the Final Fortune has been really strong for me, I want a second one. Not really caring about indestructible creatures in this deck, probably just wanting the extra turn that steals games out of nowhere. But I like a lot of the innovations in this version of Dihada. I feel like maybe some of the decks that had been using Dihada previously had gotten pretty copy and paste, and I know a lot of the main pilots, including Z-Rob, who was the originator of the Dihada list, has kind of moved back onto Rogsai. So I love seeing innovation in a deck where the original creator is kind of moved on. So there's still work being done with it, and I really like that. This is the kind of innovation that makes me want to relook at Dihada, especially using combos like Leonin Relic Warder to be able to you basically have a nice clean win con in the deck. This is great. We got 2 Vristics in a trench coat. cEDH, Zur, tempo by Fizzle. This is Zur. Classic ol' Zur, but also not ol'. This is new Zur in a sense. There's a lot of wild stuff in this deck. This is definitely not the Zur of ages past, but also not the Zur that's traditionally played nowadays. I know Drake Sasser has been doing a lot of work on Zur as of late. I'm not sure how much this list is inspired by his work on the archetype, but Zur is one of those decks that people were totally scared of when cEDH really started to begin in its very early days. It sort of fell off because it had such a boogeyman status to it, and then people have been lately saying it's actually kind of playable again, which is pretty sick. This list not really running any of the flash synergies here. I'm not seeing any Shimmermer, any Liberator. We are seeing Born Upon the Wind, which is just like a really card efficient way to be able to turn Necropotence into wins, but this list is definitely a lot more mid-range-esque. We have, even counterspells like Doman's Veto in a list like this, and as the name sort of implies, we got Rhystic Study and Mirror Maid here for a second Rhystic Study, so this list definitely looking to grind the game out a little bit. Grasp of Fate, classic Zur option for removal. Dance of Many, which is a really interesting clone, and the ability to get a clone with Zur is actually pretty interesting too. And then Phyrexian Unlife, which I'm not really sure about the Phyrexian Unlife synergies in this deck. I don't know if there's anything specific that I am missing, but I can imagine like with an Ad Naz in hand, Phyrexian Unlife makes pretty sick Naz. And that's really the only synergy I can really see with it in this current iteration of the list. I'm not really seeing any like Spoils of the Vault or anything like that. But yeah, we got a lot of Esper good stuff options here in the main board of this deck. A lot of these new card draw engines like Talion and One Ring and Rhystic Study and all those things. Not Rhystic Study not being new, obviously. But it's pretty cool to see Zur being played in the year 2023. What is with the Blue Farm pilots in this tournament? This one's called Crom and Me and Call Me a Dirty Girl by Spooner9999. You guys were really putting me through it on this one. We have a pretty unique Blue Farm list here. Not running like the most amazing unique cards in it, but definitely running some options that are not traditionally played. So we have some options here like Smothering Tithe, which is like in and out of a number of Blue Farm decks. I did see it get put to good use when I was playing at Crimson Lion. We have Imposter Mech here, which is not a traditional clone effect played in Blue Farm, with no Phantasmal Image, no Phyrexian Metamorph, so that being the only real clone in this list. Teferi, Time Raveler, and Displacer Kitten combos are definitely here, which is really interesting because we have a Walking Ballista in this list, and I'm wondering if that's sort of an outlet for the Teferi and Kitten loops to be able to draw your whole deck and then convert that into some sort of Walking Ballista win. Definitely short on sorceries here in this Blue Farm list, and very, very few board wipes in general. Really just Cyclonic Rift and Dam, which is like 2, which is not bad at all, but Dam is not usually the option I see traditionally played in this archetype. This option also using Deadly Rollick, which is not as often used in Blue Farm specifically. Definitely a bit of a heavier on some unique creatures here. I know Containment Priest is a piece that some people have used in the past, some people have not. Gilded Drake, often not played in Blue Farm much anymore, but still a very powerful card. And then we talked about Hireling and how it's not traditionally played in Blue Farm much anymore, but still used here today. So definitely a unique Blue Farm list, and definitely got some choices that are not often seen in this archetype. Definitely curious about the Ballista, if I'm right about it sort of being an outlet for Kitten and Teferi, even though you still can't make infinite mana with it. So definitely curious if the pilot of this deck, Spooner, watches this video. Love to hear a bit about the Ballista inclusion. Okay. Here's the big spice of this tournament. There are 3 copies of this Varragoth Turbo Naz deck. So for those who don't know, talk about Varragoth the Blood Sky Sire. So it's a Death Touch 2/3 for 3 mana and has Boast of 1 and a black. And it says, and Boast means that you can activate this ability if this creature is attacking. For 1 and a black, target player searches their library for a card, then shuffles their library and puts that card on top of it. So basically, it does the mono black Sidisi thing in the command zone where it is just a tutor in the command zone, right? I'm going to break down this version of the deck. I will talk about the other 2 that are in this tournament and the differences they have as they come up. But first I'm going to explain sort of the power of this archetype. The easiest way to explain what is going on in this list is to first scroll down to the instance and point out that this is an ad nauseum deck. Okay, step 1. Step 2, I'm going to scroll down all the way here, I guess show you it's a 43 land ad nauseam deck. Okay, then I'm going to scroll all the way down here to show you the average mana value of this deck, which is 0.33. That is an entire 1 mana value less than the average Turbo Rog Silas list, which means that the average card in this deck has a mana value of a third. 1 out of every 3 cards in this deck has a mana value 1, where the others have mana value 0, if you do the math that way. So now when we scroll back up here, and I show you all of these 0 drops, it's going to start making a lot more sense. Basically, and I'm actually just going to double check this here, because the total mana value, oh yeah, the mana value of the entire deck is 37. So the entire mana value of the deck, the whole thing, is 37. This number includes ad nauseam. So if you resolve an ad nauseam in this deck, your entire mana value is 32. So if an ad nauseam resolves in this archetype, you literally draw your entire deck. So now that we get the central conceded this deck, let's talk about some of the inclusions. Some of them I think it is pretty easy to summarize as just is 0 drop. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of the first cards in the deck are just there because they're 0 drops. You know, Walking Ballista probably has some utility. Some of these other ones could probably find some niche utility. Then we have Blood Pet, a 1 drop that also refunds itself. We have Opposition Agent, actually pretty interesting with Varragoth. So for example, if your opponents have an opposition agent out, you can attack with Varragoth and your own opposition agent, and you force someone else to tutor to the top of their library, and you can grab that with opposition agent. So I like that inclusion actually a lot in this deck. We have Scheming Symmetry here, in case for some reason you lose your tutor in the command zone. You know, Drandeth Magistrate, all that stuff. Imperial Seal, tutor. Demonic Tutor, tutor. I'm really surprised actually to not see a Diabolic Intent in this list, just because you have so many 0 drop creatures that I feel like it's kind of free because most of them are pretty bad. Notably, we have Sickening Dreams here, which I'm pretty sure is part of the win condition of this deck. And that's something we'll talk about in a second, because I don't think it's quite clear exactly how the win condition... Oh, never mind. I just got it, actually, after staring at this deck for a really long time. Okay, so this is how you win with the deck. You Sickening Dreams, right? Discard a bunch of cards from your hand, right? And then I believe you cast Songs of the Damned, which adds black for every card in your graveyard. This is how we do it. So how many creatures we got in total? Because once again, you draw your whole deck, so you're gonna get all of them. So you got 13 here, right? So you at least make 13 mana after dealing your opponents a bunch of damage with the Sickening Dreams, right? Because Sickening Dreams does that much damage to each creature and each player. And then you can cast Exsanguinate for, I guess, at least 13, which, you know, with Yawgmoth's Will, you can then like play the Songs of the Damned again, do the Exsanguinate again, that kind of thing. The idea being here, basically, you can play as many things as you want, get a bunch of mana on the field, get a bunch of black mana with Cabal Ritual, Dark Ritual, Culling the Weak, Songs of the Damned, Rain to Filth, etc., etc., etc. Cast that Sickening Dreams, and then finish them off with Exsanguinate, unless I am gravely mistaken and I'm missing something. That seems to be the main way you can win, although Glacial Chasm also works here, because you can play the Glacial Chasm, which normally is just kind of a card played in casual decks, but Glacial Chasm reduces all damage dealt to you to 0. So for example, if you draw, I don't know, your entire deck like you can do with this list, you can cast Sickening Dreams and dump your entire hand, killing your opponents, and once again, having all damage dealt to you equaling 0. This deck is crazy. I love it. This is just a wild deck. I'm kind of surprised there's no like Aetherflux Reservoir as like a backup win condition. I'm also a little surprised that there's no like Bolas's Citadel as a backup ad nauseam in case something happens to that card. There's also not a ton of ways to actually protect your Adnaz, which I'm a little surprised by as well. Like I would expect something like a Defense Grid in here, which adds 2 mana value to the entire deck, and I can definitely see other cards in here being just okay compared to, once again, just adding 2 mana to the entire list. But it feels like a pretty free inclusion that I'm a little surprised not to see. And you know, with the mana value of the deck being so low, I assume Citadel would do very similar stuff to be able to draw the entire deck. Obviously, you have 43 lands, which are a little tougher with Citadel because every time you hit double land, it makes it really, really difficult to continue using Citadel. So I like this archetype a lot. I think it's extremely spicy. I think it's really, really unique. I have a comment from one of the tournament organizers here that they have the original deck name. Baron Light Eyes is the original author of the Varragoth list and apparently has a primer available. This is okay, and we're looking at Baron's list right now. So Baron is this player here who I believe is in 8th place. So our 8th place player here, Baron Light Eyes, the originator of this archetype. But once again, there are 3 more of these in this tournament. Well, like, first of all, huge congratulations to not only this player, but the 3 of them showing up and playing this insanely cool deck. The fact that all 3 of them did very well with it, made top 16, and one made top 4, hint, hint, and were able to bring a deck that literally people aren't even talking about at all and doing insane stuff with it. So huge shout out for being able to crush it with this really, really cool deck. I love seeing innovation in cEDH. I love that this is a monocolored deck with an average mana value of 0.3. Yeah, all of this is just sick. I think it's really, really cool. And I'm definitely interested to hear sort of commentary on why to play this deck as compared to something like 5 mana CDC. I'm definitely curious about that as well. But without any further ado, let's move on to our second copy of this deck. And let's do a little comparison. So, all right, big resounding differences between Baron Light Eyes version and this version, Varragoth Turbonaws by Nobody P1. Differences: nobody is playing an Elixir of Immortality, and Baron's playing a Felden's Cane. Same deck apart from that. So I'm not really gonna spend any more time on that. There's 2 cards different. But still, congrats nobody. We have Riled Up White Kids with Sisay Tutor Chains. Riled was on our last one of these breakdowns as well, playing in an insanely spicy version of 5-color Sisay. Riled, also known as being just a Sisay player pretty frequently in the format. And here we have them with this 5-color Sisay deck. This is definitely more of a traditional 5-color Sisay list with the tutor chains of being able to go Aminatu, Nicol Bolas, and Oath of Teferi. Definitely playing some interesting cards here, like Cultist of the Absolute lines into the Chromatic Orrery, which, depending on the pilot of this deck, will either say this is an awesome inclusion or something that people are not very excited about. It really does depend on the pilot and what their interest is in going through these lines. This list also playing Oath of Nissa, a pretty spicy inclusion there. One that was played a lot with like early Sisay lists, and then I feel like most players debate it quite frequently. This list also on the One Ring, which is wild seeing as they have like Soul Ring and Mana Crypt, but very few ways to actually get it down super early. And in a Mox Opal here, which I'm quite surprised to see as a 12 artifact deck. That's way below the number I like to feel comfortable with a Mox Opal in my list, and where there's some treasure synergies and things like Ragavan, Espresso, and stuff like that, but still 12 artifacts is quite low. We also have Ledger Shredder here in the deck, not traditionally a commonly played option, and Olivia Mobilized for War is definitely an interesting one. I know a lot of people are excited about this and the synergy that it has with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. There's definitely some really broken stuff you can do with the combination of these two. Olivia being able to give haste to your cards like Favorite Elder and Bloom Tender is actually pretty huge. This list also playing Selvala and stuff like that. So definitely some interesting stuff here. Kalane, Reclusive Painter, is kind of interesting because it's the 2 colors that are like hardest to get in Sisay lists, which are red and black, but also adds a little bit of treasure to refund itself, so you can start activating Sisay pretty early, which is pretty sweet. Kind of does the Dihada thing in that sense. And also Luris in this version of the deck. I've been pretty low on Luris in Sisay, but I also definitely understand its inclusion for sure. Apart from that, not too many crazy things. A few interesting instant sorceries here with like a Braid and stuff like that, and not choosing to play Invasion of Ikoria, which is a pretty common piece in Sisay. Apart from that, there's definitely some spicy inclusions in this variant of Sisay, but at the end of the day, we're doing the Planeswalker lines, and also in this version, the Cultist lines, which are pretty sick. We have a Hamster deck by Shrrr. I don't know how that's how you say it, but you know, we're here. This is a pretty classic Minsk's beloved Ranger deck. We are either trying to get a Protean Hulk onto the battlefield or an Arena Rector. If you get an Arena Rector, it converts the Rector into a Vivian that allows you to go up the podding Kiki-Jiki lines. Basically, you turn your Minsk into a Felidar Guardian, which flickers Vivian, which then gets Karmic Guide, brings that back, which then makes you Vivian again. You're able to get Kiki, restoring that, getting Felidar back, doing the classic Kiki lines with that. You can also do that with a Birthing Pod, usually found in this deck as well. And then also being able to play the Hulk lines. Also usually going for Kiki lines if you're doing Hulk stuff. Basically, I think you get like No, you don't get Grand Abolisher and Karmic Guide. Oh, you get the Griffin. Usually. Yeah, you get Griffin and Grand Abolisher. Then you get Karmic Guide, Kiki, etc., etc., etc. The same thing, but basically adding a Protean Hulk into the equation as well. It's always really cool to see this deck. It was doing really well early in last year, but sort of took a hit when Bowmasters started being relevant in the format. And yeah, so this deck definitely took a hit from Bowmasters, but glad to see it still being played. It's a really cool archetype. I think Protean Hulk is not doing great in the year of our Lord 2023, so it is really nice to see it still putting up results and doing the cool stuff. Before we get into our top four, reminding you, we do coaching here at Comedian MTG. If you're interested in receiving coaching from the player with the most wins with different archetypes in cEDH for the past 2 years, feel free to jump into, once again, you find me on Discord at comedian_MTG. You can find me on Twitter at comedianmtg and email at comedianmtg@gmail.com. Any interest in those, feel free to let me know. We have gameplay coaching in which you sit down with myself and 3 people and just play some cEDH games, doing a little bit of coaching in between, or one-on-one coaching going over decks, politics, strategies, deck techs, things like that. So if you're interested in that, find me at any of those places that I mentioned before. We have Darth Vexed with a not cursed name for Blue Farm, Farming Simulator. This is a pretty classic Blue Farm thing. We have a choice of doing Serra Ascendant in this Blue Farm list. Once again, no 3-mana Teferi, nobody respecting, probably the best card in the archetype. We have a good amount of human synergy here with Lavinia, Ranger Captain, Opposition Agent. Definitely a heavy human strategy, and let's see if they're up in those Cavern of Souls. So many humans, no Cavern of Souls. One of my favorite cards in the archetype as well, not being played here. Counterbalance, a card that was actually pretty popular in Blue Farm for a while, about last year, and then sort of fell off of the archetype. Some of them even going as far as playing Sensei's Top to be really synergistic with that card. So some interesting stuff here from this Blue Farm list, but apart from that, nothing too crazy. Also choosing to go for the double wheel version of the deck. Pretty sweet stuff. We got Flippin' Kinnan by Crash Mitch 26. This is Kinnan choosing to go with a very Wounded Satellite-esque version of this deck. A very similar idea to that player, known for this archetype, especially with the inclusion of things like the Armored Scrapgorger, which is, Wounded sort of calling card. This version playing Paradise Druid, not often played in this archetype for sure. We have 7-mana Jin-Gitaxias, which is one that, very popular in early versions of Kinnan, but hasn't really seen much play nowadays. And also, definitely worthy of note, Apex Altasaur here, which I have heard, I believe it was from our player here, that this version was basically, instead of doing Thorn Mammoth where you kill a creature basically every once in a little while, this version doing a one-sided board wipe as soon as Altasaur enters the battlefield. Definitely a strong card in the sense of, when it comes down and when it gets flipped off Kinnan, it's a one-sided board wipe, which is pretty sick. But definitely not a traditionally played option in this deck. Yeah, Altasaur definitely a sweet option, definitely a non-traditional option for Kinnan decks, but, one-sided board wipes are one-sided board wipes. Apart from that, not too many crazy innovations here. A lot of stuff like being able to play Agatha Soul Cauldron without using Mirage Mirror as a classic staple of the Kinnan archetype. This list using Gitaxian Probe, not often really seen in this deck. No Trophy Mage present here in this list. So definitely some choices here and there that are, not as traditional as some other ones, but definitely a classic Kinnan deck running a lot of the same stuff that Kinnan is known to be doing. A lot of these Kinnans nowadays are definitely this sort of hybrid between big flips and mid-range explosivity for sure. This is our last Varagoth list, Choke on It by Suddenly Steve, our top 4 version of this deck. Let's see. Now this version having a whole 3 differences from our deck originator, Baron Light Eyes. Baron having Felden's Cane, Scheming Symmetry, and Engineered Explosives, whereas this version of the deck being on Scorched Ruins, which is definitely an atypical land, but it provides a ton of mana in your deck. Desert the Glorified being a cycling desert, and Elixir of Immortality, which we saw in our other version of this deck. So a couple different choices here. This one on even more lands than the other Varaggoth list, which is pretty interesting. Definitely doing some unique stuff in the deck, you know, going down a mana cost from the other version of the deck for sure. So this one, total mana value of 31, kind of crazy stuff. Yeah, I don't know. These Varaggoth lists are so sweet. Congrats once again to all 3 of these players, for Baron for originating this deck, and for all 3 of our top 16s / top 4 players here for just absolutely bringing this out of nowhere deck and just slamming a whole tournament with it. It's pretty sick. And our number 1 player winning the whole thing, we have Jila-ing to the win by Salaza21. This is classic turbo mid-range Najeela. This archetype is not doing as well lately, but this one, you know, able to take down the entire tournament. We have Druid's Repository, a sort of blast from the past from Najeela, which hasn't really been seeing play a ton. This version's also on Grim Hireling and Derevi, which is definitely sort of the triumvirate of all 3 of the more popular Najeela options. Nature's Will has really fallen off in favor of these more aggressive Najeela lists. We got Archivist of Ogma here for card advantage, which isn't always the most common piece, but I really like having my more card advantage engine heavy Najeela decks, because I find that, you know, the more card draw you can get when your commander doesn't have it, the better. We have Chatterfang in here as a crazy control option with Najeela. Basically, you start to double the amount of tokens created, which one puts pressure on the board, definitely adds a lot of bodies, but then also allows you to basically convert your black mana into removal spells with Najeela too. So those warriors become a lot more valuable when they're also removal. Apart from that, this deck is doing the ad nauseum stuff. We have Chance for Glory here. Everybody Lives, I was told that it was a very impactful piece in this deck. So I actually have a whole write-up from our winning pilot here about this Everybody Lives, and I'm definitely not going to break down each piece that they sent me, but they had a lot to say about this card. Our player here said, my initial intent was to use it to protect the board when ahead or counter any damage / win the game spot attempts, but throughout the tournament I realized I could use it as a way to live after using my extra turn spells along with those 2 previous applications. It was quite flexible that way, and I have nothing but good things to say about the card. I was also able to play a Final Fortune, take a second turn, and win with the Samut to draw out Chance for Glory, cast it along with Everybody Lives, and chain 3 turns for a win. So this was some pretty cool stuff. Everybody Lives definitely being a unique new card from the Doctor Who set. This set literally was legal the day before this tournament happened. So to be clear, gains all creatures, gain hexproof and indestructible at the end of turn, which is awesome when you're trying to protect a board of Najeela tokens. Players gain hexproof until the end of turn, and players can't lose life this turn. Players can't lose the game or win the game. So this, in a sense, is like an Angel's Grace and a Heroic Intervention sort of stapled together, and it is, you know, symmetrical for sure, but I guess when you're playing Najeela, it's very easy to feel pretty good about, you know, being able to cast a spell like this and keep your entire board, which is really nice. So new Doctor Who cards, only one in the deck, but this one coming in and apparently making a pretty big impact on this archetype. Something also to mention about this version of the deck is this is, you know, not a ton of artifacts for a turbo-esque Najeela deck. Definitely a little bit later than I think I was traditionally expecting to see, but also the more important ones are here, right? We got our Mox Diamond, Chrome Mox, Lotus Petal, Jeweled Lotus, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt. Those are the big ones, and then you have Wishclaw and the One Ring here for value. Definitely some really cool stuff. I'm excited to see if Everybody Lives continues to be a really powerful card. We had our winning pilot reach out to me by the instruction of the TOs just to talk about how awesome this card was. So definitely curious to hear if other folks keep having results like this. It's pretty cool to have such a unique card, and definitely interesting to see if it's a flash in the pan or something that sticks around. Pretty exciting stuff. So thank you to our Salt City Rock Salt tournament organizers for making this video possible. This top 16 was pretty sick. 95 players once again for a Utah-based event that was not really promoted as a many people from different coasts flying this thing, but just a really large large, powerful local event that was doing some pretty cool stuff. So it's really awesome to see. This Vargoth list come in and just dunk on this tournament, doing really awesome stuff with that deck. Really cool to see a lot of the stuff that is being featured here today. As I mentioned, if I have any information from the TOs to share with y'all, I will put it in the description down below. Without any further ado, thank you all so much for watching this video. I am so excited to continue breaking down these top 16s for you, and I will see you all at the next one. Peace.